Hello, and welcome to Stories from the View, a podcast from the Pleasant View Senior Center in East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. I'm Don Mackey. On this podcast, we invite East Longmeadow residents to tell us stories about their lives and events, and sometimes about timely topics in town. And our guest today is Tom Christensen, Deputy Town Manager for the town of East Longmeadow. And I'm filling in today for Eric Elmendorf as the host because we're going to talk about broadband in East Longmeadow and a vote coming up on the June town election ballot that will ask voters to ratify a process called adoption of a municipal lighting plant. So, Tom, thanks for coming.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We're going to do this. Yeah, well, thanks for coming.
Exciting stuff.
So do you want to just sort of give a quick, heads up about the vote and the election and what the deal is?
Yeah, that's really the catalyst to this whole process is we have a June 6th, the town election. We have a question on there to, like you said, ratify 2 votes already of the council for the town to create a municipal light plant. The state law requires it go to the voters, so that's why the question's on there. And the real purpose of creating a municipal light plant is to allow the town to offer a utility package, in this case telecommunications via fiber, so that we can have sort of another option for our residents in terms of their telecommunications,
Yeah. So maybe just to give folks a little bit of background, I have served for, I think, since the end of 2019 or early 2020.
Since the creation of the
broadband committee by Mary McNally, the town manager, really to look at the question of what options does the town of East Longmeadow have to provide an internet network that can serve town residents. And people may or may not know that the town has a very extensive fiber optic network that serves town government. So I think we have, 26 or 27 access points around town. Mm-hmm. That network was installed underground back in 2005, before the rail trail was actually completed. And that provides really high-speed, reliable fiber optic communications among all town buildings, pump stations, DPW, fire, and the town basically runs on that high-speed network. So the thought is, how does that position the town to leverage that into a network that could then be used to provide high-speed access to the internet for residents? And that's where we are. In order to be able to pursue that in any meaningful way, the town is required to form what's called a municipal lighting plant, which is Commonwealth of Massachusetts legislation that allows towns to provide public utilities for residents. And this would be classified as a telecommunications utility if we did that.
Correct.
So, now you had some experience in a prior position.
Previous life, yeah.
So does that give you any insight into sort of how this thing might work? Or?
So Don's referring to, I before the DPW and ultimately the town manager's office, I was at Concord Municipal Light Plant in Concord, Mass. And I was there for 10 years or so. In the last 5 of which they started to offer internet to the home. And when I left there, the waiting list was 500 strong. And they were pumping out 10, 15 a day. And they couldn't even crack the waiting list. And the I guess the best part about that was when you had something wrong with your internet and you called Bill Underhill, he answered his phone.
Right.
and said, okay, we'll be right out there. As opposed to, I mean, a larger utility, they have a lot of customers. It's hard to get to everybody
Correct.
in what that person would deem a timely manner, right?
Right.
They're doing the best they can. They have millions of customers, so they're doing the best they can. However, when you're searching for an answer and you can't get one, it's a difficult position to be in. So that we found from the feedback was the customer service from a small internet provider is second to none. And, you know, just to back up too, I think, you know, in all your conversations with the broadband committee, you know, the fiber to the home project almost didn't happen, right? Or it wasn't even an option back even a couple years ago because
Correct.
it just didn't seem feasible.
Correct.
So I think that's the exciting part, and why we're here is there are now a lot of options that are very good.
Right.
And the reason we're even having this conversation about this vote is we're confident that we can offer this service and it'll pay for itself.
It's a key point.
Key point. Probably the biggest point.
Correct. And I'll just jump in.
Yeah,
and
please.
To say that the Broadband Committee back in 2020 did a lot of research.
Correct,
we
you're right.
did a lot of research. We looked at all the efforts, certainly in Western Mass and all over the country, where municipalities were looking at how do we offer municipal broadband. And some of those efforts were very expensive. There was a lot of bonding, and the payback and the potential, what they call the take rate, the number of people who have existing service who would jump over to the new service, was a question. And we even deemed as a committee, we didn't recommend moving forward with this because it looked at the time as if technology in the private sector would be able to provide those options in the foreseeable future,
right,
if not immediately.
Right.
That fundamentally changed with COVID and in the wake of COVID. And the technology changed, and the reality about what those technologies were, a lot of people hear about 5G. 5G exists. But there was a lot of anxiety even about, right? So these companies now, 5G requires a higher frequency transmission, and they were going to have these little antennas like on every telephone pole. And the antennas were going to be all over the place. Instead of a big cell tower,
right,
you were going to have antennas like all over town. And there was a lot of talk by people who, some people felt that was potentially dangerous, right? That some of that stuff. But in any event, that technology really took a few steps backwards. And you look at that and the investments that the other providers are making in improving fiber to the home, the incentives they have to do that. And suddenly the picture really changed for us. So again, all of that kind of background research and analysis was done by the Broadband Committee, which, consists of some pretty smart people.
Absolutely.
I say so myself.
Oh, yeah.
And
the chair in particular.
Well, you have Mr. Quimby. I can't leave him out. But so that's been done. And we're not going into this, to get back to the key point. The only way it makes sense to do this is if it pays for itself. If you sign up customers and they're paying for a service and they're happy with it, and it's competitive, it's affordable, it's reliable, then you're basically generating the revenue that that sustains the operation. That this is not a taxpayer-supported function of town government. It's a self-running enterprise.
Right. Yep. And once it gets off the ground, runs itself.
Yeah. The light plan, that terminology, I think it throws people. Like with me, it did when I first got involved.
Yes.
What is light? Lights, street lights.
Correct.
So an explanation of that would be good, in defining what that is. Also, the terminology on the ballot that we had talked about, the wording is set wording that could get confusing.
It's just the terminology, and rather than rewrite or come up with new general law, they sort of lump the telecommunications
Adapted
in with
correct.
electricity.
That's what I think people need to understand.
Yeah. So the lighting plan, yeah, it is it's an unusual term for what we're trying to do.
No, that's a good question. No, there's a lot of things that we've identified as what we think is confusing or people aren't going to be sure about, but to get questions like that, we don't know all the questions that people have, right? There's no way to know. And so the more information we can get out about,
right.
How much research has been done on this, how much we think it's going to work, and how excited we are about it. And that's why the question's on the ballot, because we're ready to do this. We've sort of vetted everything out.
Yeah.
Just bringing that up. I just wanted to bring it up.
No, I
love it.
I appreciate you bringing it up.
You can cut all this out of that.
No, I'm going to leave it. I'll just try to make it work with it's the sound levels, but.
Are we gonna take over electricity, or we're just, this?
So no, now, I don't think there's a community probably in the past 50 years that has formed an MLP to generate electricity. However,
Right.
most of the communities that do operate an MLP and generate their own electricity, Holyoke, Chicopee, Westfield, and 49 others, have moved pretty successfully to then piggyback internet service on top of that, because they have the poles, they own the poles, they own the means to get to everybody's premises already. They don't have to, a municipality typically has to purchase those rights or purchase that space on a pole from the utility that owns the pole in order to be able to build this network out. So what advantages East Long Meadow in particular is that we go to all the corners of the town with these fiber optic hubs already. So you're not starting at the town hall and basically going pole by pole by pole everywhere.
Yep. And that, again, that's sort of why, so to answer the question, it would be difficult for us to buy all that infrastructure at whatever rate our current utility providers would charge us.
Correct.
To even have that option. And that's why at this point, and that's sort of why I said, the people that were fortunate enough and had the foresight enough and the geography enough
right,
to supply their community with their own electricity way back when are just, it's just like they sort of hit the mother lode way back when.
Right. So, that just makes me think that I'm going to take the opportunity here to just say that that infrastructure cost from zero is why we currently have one provider in town, because like those municipalities that back in the day had the foresight to build those networks, one provider built a cable network in East Long Meadow when cable became a thing. That cable company owns all of that infrastructure. They pay those utility companies, Verizon and National Grid, for that pole space, and they own that network. For a competing cable provider to come to East Long Meadow would require that cable provider to build that network out from scratch. And for a big company to put that kind of a capital investment in a community with 5,000 subscribers, not even 4,500 subscribers, to be competitive, the financial incentive is not there.
It's not there.
Which is the reason we have one cable provider. It's not because the town grants a favoritism to one cable provider at all.
Right.
So I think that that's a key point. The town is in a somewhat different position in terms of that cost structure.
Correct.
And I think that's what we're looking at.
And we have other advantages too. Because of all the subdivisions in town, we have a lot of neighborhoods that we don't need to go through the other utilities because they're underground. So that construction cost is on us, and there's no application fee or attachment fee or
Correct.
any of that stuff. So again, like I said, and I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but a lot of work has been done, a lot of research has been done to get to this point, and that's why inevitably this question is now on the ballot.
So, and really there's not much more work that can be done.
Right.
If this
Legally.
No, but that it can't be
Right.
done until, there is an MLP that puts the town in a position to be able to do it.
Right.
The other key thing is that it will not require us to do anything.
Correct. Excellent.
So the vote to establish an MLP is a vote basically to grant the town the authority to operate one if it finds that it makes sense to do it.
That's actually probably the second best point.
Okay.
Right? Is
Really important.
We're not required or obligated to do anything.
Correct.
with a yes vote. Right? It's just to give us the opportunity and the ability to under state law.
Correct.
And if we can't, then a no vote means we can't even explore these opportunities.
Correct.
So that's really the crux of the whole question. Yes is we can look into this, and if it makes sense for the town of East Long Meadow, we move forward. If we vote no, we can't even look to see if this is an option.
Correct.
Which, obviously everybody has opinions, and there's certainly an argument in every ballot question for a yes or a no. So we're just trying to get this information out there so people know what
Correct.
this vote actually means.
Correct. Because it's going to be on the ballot
June 6th.
Yep. And the text of the question is long.
Yep.
And it's a little bit opaque. But the gist of it is, do you give the town the authority to take the next step in order for this to happen? And just as a factual matter, right, because we're here to provide information.
Love facts, Don. Love them.
This is a 3-step process to adopt an MLP. 2 consecutive votes, or 2 votes
In
consecutive fiscal years
Yep.
by the town council or the town meeting, in our case, the town council. 2 affirmative votes. That's happened
Yep.
with 2 unanimous votes
Yep.
by the East Long Meadow Town Council.
Yep.
So they've
Thanks to
looked
two particular broadband committee members, I would imagine.
but they've looked at the analysis and thought this makes sense to continue
Looking into the issue.
looking into this,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yep.
And they voted unanimously to put it on the ballot.
Right.
So that's just a frame of reference for people as to how this got onto the ballot. And there, certainly people are welcome to call me at LCAT.
Yep.
I'll put the number up, 525-4220, or
Yep.
call the town manager's office
Yep.
and speak with you.
Extension 1100.
If you have questions, it's the issue of the vote isn't really confusing. What's behind it can be a little bit confusing.
Right.
But it's really, do you want the town to be able to look into this and perhaps offer residents a high-speed, reliable alternative to their current internet service or not?
And that's it.
That's it.
Nobody probably could have said it better than that, Don. Again, just getting the information out there. A lot of times you show up to the,
Yeah. There's not a lot on the
friction,
ballot.
and you're like, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
And right, and you don't really feel like reading the questions. So if you didn't do your work before you got there, you just leave it blank, or you're not sure what to do. And so I think it's important for us to get the information out so that if there are questions, they're answered before you get there on June 6th.
And, in my position, I get a lot of phone calls
I bet.
about service issues
Yeah.
that really don't have anything to do with LCAT.
Right.
But
you're a nice guy and you answer them all probably.
well, because, I think that there is a long-standing issue that people have, and this might be a viable way to address some of that. And I hope people take the opportunity to, there's, like I started to say, there's not a lot on the ballot. There's a town council election that's uncontested, and there's a school committee election that's uncontested. So there's not a lot of motivation to get people to go to the polls.
Right.
But maybe this is motivation to go and, vote your preference
Correct.
for whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. Right. All right. Well, thank you, sir. And thanks, Mary, and thanks to Ed. He had to jump out, but, he brought up a couple of very key points. So, Jeff, as always, it's great. We got the whole gang here. That wraps up another episode of Stories from the View. We'd like to thank our guest, Tom Christensen.
Thank you for having me.
Deputy Town Manager.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
The Stories from the View podcast is available on the LCAT 01028 channel on YouTube. If you have a story you'd like to share on the program, contact Pleasant View Senior Center Director Aaron Kobler by stopping by the Pleasant View Senior Center, by calling Aaron at 413-525-5436, extension 1401, or send her an email at aaron.kobler@eastlongmeadowma.gov. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time at Stories from the View.